Okay, so I think we are recording and ready to go. So we'll get started, and as people join in, we'll just welcome them along the way during the introduction. I don't think I have actually been on an Action Network call. My name is Ian. I work with Megan, who usually leads these over at Student Voice. Merritt and myself are currently leading the organization through the end of the year, so that is exciting. We are also so excited to have Dr. Dorothy Espelage on today's call. We will be learning all things school climate, plus more. So that is exciting. I will share just a little bit about her, and then I believe you have a PowerPoint to go through, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers as always. And then, after the fact, we can share contact information and anything else to make sure that we stay connected as needed. All right. Well, Dr. Dorothy Espelage is a William C. Friday Distinguished Professor of Education at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She's one of the world's leading experts on bullying and aims to help the public and policymakers create programs that prevent and provide interventions for bullying within schools. She has authored over 190 peer-reviewed articles, 6 edited books, and 70 chapters on bullying, homophobic teasing, sexual harassment, dating violence, and gang violence. As well, she is an APA Lifetime Achievement Award recipient in Prevention Science, and a 2016 APA Award for Distinguished Contributions to Research within Public Policy. Her work and herself has been featured on The Today Show, CNN, CBS, Anderson Cooper, and on the Oprah Winfrey Show. So quite a distinguished professional we have here today. Yeah, let's just dive in. The more time, the merrier.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be with you guys from Chapel Hill here at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night when everybody's gearing up for the break so we can all catch up on our work and see our family. I'm going to talk to you about school climate. As some of you know on the call, during the Obama administration, there was a huge focus in the Department of Education on really understanding what school climate is, how to measure it, how to offer free surveys to K through 12. And even I would even say higher ed at that point, given the sexual assaults on college campus, we're concerned about climate. So I'm going to talk to you for about 25 minutes about a really complicated area of research, but also straightforward at the same time. Like some of this stuff is a no-brainer, but the measurement is very complex. Some people we throw school climate around as if we all have a consensus definition of this. For some of us, school climate in the K through 12 or higher ed, it's almost an ethos. It's like something you just feel in your gut when you go into the schools. You almost feel as if, do you want to stay there or do you want to get the hell out? That's not very scientific to think about the measurement. Certainly, the Department of Education, which I'm going to share with you some of the work that they've done there. This is just the tip of the iceberg as far as we look at school climate literature. There's hundreds of articles written across the globe on this topic. But consistently, school climate matters. And hopefully you'll learn in the next 20, 25 minutes just about how complicated this phenomenon is. Works. You guys see that?
Yes.
Oh, miracle. Oh, miracle. So that is Peabody School of Education, where I teach next semester adolescent development. So anybody wants to join, more the merrier. And so we're going to talk a little bit about definitions, measures, and importance, and then also end just a little bit of how we're trying to address school climate, but using youth voice and youth-led interventions. I'm not sure how far I'll get, but we'll see. There's more text and slides on here that I'm not going to read from the slides. You guys, I just want to make sure that you had other models besides the Department of Education. Catherine Bradshaw's group out of Johns Hopkins has been doing a lot of work in Maryland with their school climate surveys for quite a bit of time statewide. Dewey Cornell at UVA, Matthew Mayer at Rutgers. So this is just, although I would say the Department of Education surveys has drawn from all of these folks that I just talked about. And I should probably call them doctors or professors, but they're friends of mine. So I've been at it for a long time. I've graduated about 45 PhD students over the last 23 years, many of which are now full professors themselves. We were studying bullying in the early 90s when no one was studying bullying. We were studying LGBT bullying when no one was studying LGBT bullying. We identified students with disabilities as having low perceptions of school climate, just as well as gender and sexual minority youth. More recently, it's immigrant populations are undocumented kiddos that are having, and their families that are reporting negative and hostile climate. We don't have time to get into what has happened since in this administration, but if you want any more information, Dewar Canal has a big paper, an educational researcher that shows that the climate, especially around race, ethnicity, immigrant populations, and I would say gender and sexual minority youth, any of the hate stuff that's happening has increased. There's no causal link there, but certainly the hostility outside of the classroom is mapping on to inside the classroom. And so here's some definition. And that's probably my family like texting me or something. So I apologize. You're just going to hear a ding for every once in a while. I turn the messages off, but clearly it's not off. It's a new Mac. So school climate, according to the U.S. Department of Education's model, is really, we want to think about three buckets. And a lot of time when people are talking about climate, sometimes they think, oh, just it's all about teacher and student relationships. It's much more than that. Certainly there needs to be strong, supportive, trusting relationships between students, teachers, and the families. But that's just the beginning of it, because that engagement has to also respect diversity and school-home partnerships. We also recognize that safety is another big bucket. But we're also learning from youth. I have a paper under review here after 2 years of focus groups with high school students trying to develop a reporting app in this country, which we did, called Advocator, which I'll end with today. That most of the youth in the middle and high schools feel that, unfortunately, the hardening of the schools, that they feel pretty confident in the adults in the building to protect them physically, but feel like they have completely missed the boat around emotional safety. So our Advocator app that we created with the high school students across the country had the ability for them to report emotional safety concerns that they might have for themselves or for their friends. And safety here, it's also this concern of substance use. And right now, the big concern in the high schools for folks that don't vape is the vaping in the classrooms. I'm sure they're vaping there too, but in the bathrooms. And so we've got papers on vaping now too, and trying to do youth-led, peer-led vaping interventions if you want to hear more about that. But that also changes when you have substance and gang presence in the schools. We know that that compromises the perceptions of school climate, even if you're not using yourself. That's just the reality of it. Where drugs come, where gangs come. When gangs come, there actually misogyny comes, and so you see higher rates of sexual harassment and other forms of violence. But it's also just, as you know, like many of us like to have our rooms and our apartments and our houses like aesthetically pleasing, right? A place where you want to go. I did most of my work for 2 decades in Chicago public schools in the South Side, where kids had no doors on the stalls in the bathroom, and they had to ask essentially to get a bar of soap and a roll of toilet paper when they went to the bathroom. And people were like, oh my God, this is great. So I was like, no, that was pretty commonplace. And the teachers really didn't necessarily have anywhere to go either. In some of these schools, you might have gang graffiti, which we often in Southside at one of my schools that I love to death, but the gangs did run kind of the schools. And the kids that were in the K-8 setting actually were part of those gangs intergenerationally. And so we painted a lot of graffiti, and it was like every other week that we were painting graffiti. The other thing, what we're noticing, so environment matters, aesthetics matter. Chaotic clutter, can be very disruptive. We're also learning, which we don't have time to talk about today, but I was in a school in Urbana, Illinois, just this past week, where the principal has taken over this turnaround school. And I watched this, it was a case study of mine. I watched her take over this school that's 90% low socioeconomic status, 90% free and reduced lunch. And a lot of, in this area, the more middle class to upper class families have moved out. The principal was very chaotic. There was just lots of trash and really bright, chaotic colors. She's now shifted it to have a trauma-informed look of really neutral things. She got rid of all the clutter, as well as addressing some of the safety issues. And the kids that are highly experience a lot of forms of trauma are a little bit more calm than they were even a year ago. So we'd have to think about the aesthetics. That includes disciplinary and environment as well. So these three buckets are somewhat broad, But under the engagement, it would be cultural and linguistic competence. So oftentimes when you look at the school climate literature, you don't hear a lot of people talking about cultural and linguistic competence. So I encourage you to look very closely at the Department of Ed and the American Institute of Research. I can send you these links. They have long documents about how they came to this particular subdomain, if you will. Certainly the engagement is relationships, positive relationships among the students and between the students and the staff. And then a place where every kid has the opportunity to participate at some level. I often tell this story that one exercise we do in teacher service, any kind of talks that I do, the first thing we do is try to identify the uninvolved kids and to measure school climate by the opportunities that everybody in that building has to participate at some level, whether that's in the classroom or extracurricular activities. And we'll go in and survey and ask teachers and the staff, and include all the staff from custodians to the janitors. Some of those folks in the building have the most knowledge, including SROs as well, to put on name of a student on a post-it that they feel like they know pretty well. And on average, about 25 to 30% of kids are not named on those post-its. And those kids are often under-involved, those kids that do not have a single deep relationship with an adult. And we try to figure out who they are and how to get them more involved. So school participation matters. Under safety, this is what you'll hear a lot of people talking about: emotional safety, physical safety, cyberbullying and bullying, substance use, is there abuse and presence there? And then now, more so than any time here in the schools, is really talking about climate from an emergency readiness management. There's a lot of talk about how to prepare our kids for what we all fear are the shootings. And so we can talk more about that too. This is like lots of things to talk about. But in the environment, we talked about the physical environment, the instructional environment, physical health, mental health, and discipline. And so you could see that these three buckets are the broadest you're going to see. Ideally, what they were trying to do at the Department of Education was to develop school tools and surveys for both teachers, for staff, administrators, parents, and students. And these are all free. They're not being used very much now because of Du Bois and the Department of Education is not kicking it out. I tweet it out as much as I can. You can collect these data in real time and get a report that shows specifically what are your areas of strengths and weaknesses. And so this really is a nice culmination of the decades of school climate literature that's out there. So these are the surveys that I was talking about. And so they didn't create any scales for the emergency readiness or management, but they were working on that when the new administration came in. If we have a new administration that, cares about school climate, then this, I think we'll be able to pick this right back up among many other things that need to be picked up. And some of the parent surveys are shorter as well. This is where I said you're going to see a lot of text. So this is just for your reference when you come back to it. Engagement is really around school connectedness. So sometimes you'll see in the literature people talking about school belonging, school connectedness. School climate is the overall umbrella that would include that. And then this is all the research supporting this idea that school connectedness is tied to both social and academic outcomes. And so again, I just pulled this out of the larger report from AIR. And you saw these different topics were mentioned. And there's nothing more beautiful than when there's cultural nights and families invited to the school. It's one indication that's probably strong, positive school climate. The positive relationships are nurtured at all levels of the ecology. And then kids have the opportunity to engage in activities as well. Safety, it is clear, there are decades of research on when kids feel unsafe, and there's victimization toward the students, that this affects academic achievement, it affects truancy, it affects all of this. So when we think about gender and sexual minority youth or students with disabilities not having a good time in the schools, that relates to them either being pushed out into special ed or out into alternative school settings. And the minute you're pushed to an alternative school setting, largely in this country, that means your career trajectory has just changed drastically. So this is a cause for concern that we need to really understand who are those kids that have compromised perceptions of school climate such that we can intervene. On a side note, I was just with American Psychological Association and the National Educational Association, NEA, and American Teacher Federation, ATF, and ASCD, which is the Curriculum and Development. We had done a survey about 10 years ago showing that 80% of teachers have been violently attacked within the classroom in their career, with 7% of them being hospitalized every year in this country because of injury in the classroom. And we're going to do another survey. So we're excited to have the support of the teachers' unions to do this work, and hopefully get the federal government to do something about it. The teaching profession is one of the only professions where they don't track injury. If you're a nurse, you will know not to go to, say, Duke Hospital, because there might be certain high rates of injury there, but you could go down here to UNC, and there might be less injury. But we don't do that for teachers for some reason. There's been a reluctance to track how safe our schools are as a profession. Knowing that teaching in K-12 settings is one of the top hazardous occupations in this country. Now, why do I say that? Because when we're talking about school climate, it's not just from the students' perception. It's also, this is the experiences of the teachers. And we know from the classic studies of Gottfredson out of Maryland that when there is violence among the teachers and the students, everybody's impacted. If there's violence in the community, that spills over into the school. And certainly we see that all the time in our work that we do. And these are just the topics again. The environment, just really well-maintained facilities, and that is a challenge in and of itself because our education system is based on property taxes. And so that means if you live in a community, in a neighborhood where there's low property taxes, that's exactly what your school is going to look like. Let's not be confused that there is not equity in education funding in this country. Most people will move their families out of inner city so that they can go to better schools where they're more resourced. And so you can't blame anybody for doing that, but it also leaves a lot of well-intentioned families that are busting their butt to create a good life, but they can't move. And so there's inequities at all levels, and that's why it is that we're trying to level the playing field with understanding school climate and the outcomes. We are, more importantly, starting to pay attention to this much about physical and mental health and as a proxy of school climate. I think we're very much concerned about adolescent suicide being the highest rates that we've seen ever. And with young African-American boys, the highest rates, even more higher rates. And so we're concerned. However, there's a big pushback to have what we call school-based mental health. So some of the progressive states, the west part of this country, does this work. There's people are quite upset at the Oregon ruling that you can take a mental health day in high school, meaning you could take the day off if you feel like you have a mental health issue you need to address, and there was you will get an unexcused absence for that. And so there's been great debate in the media about, will kids just make up stuff, right? Because I just don't want to go to school. And so I think we're recognizing that the physical health and mental health, addressing those in the larger school climate would pay off. There's also a really interesting debate that's happening around discipline. So we had zero tolerance policies that were put out, and then we went on this wave of like restorative justice and practices. And now there's a huge pushback from teachers. I was just writing a paper on focus groups with teachers, and teachers really do want to go back to just suspending and kicking kids out of the school because they feel like there's no consequences, that somehow we pulled the rug of consequences out. So we're reading things from teachers, and I'm like, no. So, and that's largely because restorative justice and problem solving and circles and that type of work takes a lot of training and continued training. And we have so much turnover in our schools that you'd almost have to retrain every year. But it's also a lot of people feel that healing and restoration is somehow letting the kids off the hook. And so just so you know, that's all affecting the school climate. But when it works and when there's a commitment, when everybody's involved in it, when you have the SRO and the social workers and the janitors, all school members involved in the restoration and the healing, the randomized clinical trials are really starting to show this is a fruitful endeavor, but you have to be in it for the long haul, and it takes about 3 to 5 years for restorative justice to really start sticking. So these are other climate surveys, just in case you're interested, but I will make sure that we send the link to the Department of Ed. I am pretty sure they're alive and well, although I went to National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs yesterday for a grant that I'm writing, and the NREP is shut down. So this may not, the Department of Ed may not be fully functional, but I'll find out for you. I just didn't want to deal with that distress after knowing that NREP wasn't up. So there's Alaska that has very similar types of things, but including more specifically social emotional learning. This is AIR's Condition for Learning Survey. A lot of the work that you just saw from the Department of Ed came out of the work with American Institute Research and a collaboration there. I wanted to show you, we have 5 minutes, this is hilarious. Okay, so this is fun. Usually this is a 15-week course, so, but you're getting like Cliff Notes version, all right. One question is, is it really, really important? And I wanted to show one of the most complex multi-level analysis, multi-informant. And this is a set of analysis with about 3,600 kids in middle school in both Illinois and Kansas, where they report, the kids report on bullying, victimization, aggression, willingness to intervene, and also homophobic name calling. We then went in and surveyed about 1,500 teachers, staff, administrators, one cafeteria worker, and one bus driver, and this was across 36 schools. And so we wanted to assess the extent to which the climate, if you will, the school environment, we call it school environment here because we didn't comprehensively test all the 3 buckets, their perceptions and their behaviors and their attitudes, did that really predict with a fancy multi-level where the students are nested within the schools, right? So the adults are the level 2 and the kids are level 1. I'm not going to get too statistical. We don't have time for this. But so we asked the adults, do other students intervene? Do students intervene in the school around violence, around bullying? Do staff intervene? Do you think you have an aggression problem in your schools? 9 of these schools are in Southside Chicago. We knew we were going to get variability there. The extent to which the teachers or the staff felt that they had the administrative support to do this work. And so that's kind of this idea of administrative support, which is huge in the education literature. Then there's a kumbaya, how there's positive is it around here. And then because I study sexual harassment and gender-based harassment, we have a scale where we ask the teachers about gender equity. More importantly, are they following Title IX? Related to sexual harassment. So are they intolerant of sexual harassment in middle school? And so this is a fancy model, but what you see here are lots of covariates, but in the second column, this is the bullying outcome. How much are the kids bullying one another? How much are they victimized? How much are they physically fighting one another? And then are they willing to intervene? And this kind of comes off the big bystander revolution thing that's happening in this world, like be kind, be nice, but yeah, people are not necessarily that way. What we find here is when we control for all the school level characteristics, if the teachers say we have an aggression problem here, I don't feel safe, the kids say I'm not intervening to help anybody. So if we want to go in and make bracelets and pencils and say you should intervene to the kids, you better take care of the aggression problem. Kids are like, it's not safe here. When the adults don't feel safe, the kids are not intervening. Pretty amazing. And so again, this is like no doubt, but in some ways this is beautiful when it shows up in really complex statistical analysis with multi-informants. When the teachers and the staff say, hell yes, my administrator I got my back, I'm able to go to training. When I have incidents in my classroom, they're supportive, there's opportunities to learn new things. Kids say they bully less, they're victimized less, and they fight less. And then I'm always happy when this shows up. And when the teachers are intolerant of sexual harassment, and there's an eye toward gender equity, kids bully less and they're victimized less. If you followed any of my work, you know, because 50% of bullying in middle school is homophobic in nature, gender-based. So that's exactly what we're picking up there. We also then find that same outcome for homophobic name calling, which is another paper that I can send you as well. So when we think about school climate, I mean, we really do think about risk and protective factors, right? So there's interconnected risk, whether that's home life, whether that's the community, whether it's the lack of resources, whether that's, you know, teachers that are not really certified to teach, which happens in our schools. Then there's protective factors, and that's what we try to bolster, the trusting relationships, really focusing on student physical and emotional well-being, creating supportive schools at each level, whether that's relationships, that's the classroom level, that's the the entirety of it, as well as promoting pro-social peers. And that risk and protective framework actually contributes to less bullying, aggression, better achievement, less disruptive behavior, less substance use, less pregnancy. So school climate matters in so many ways. And then I'm going to end with we had done 2 years of focus groups with high school students in the state of Illinois and state of Oregon. We had a $5 million grant from the National Institute of Justice to have, it's called SOARS, and this is called the Advocator app. And it's all about student voice. So we did 2 months, 2 years of focus groups. And the kids were I would say the high schoolers were quite hesitant to even entertain the idea of what they would call a snitching app. Parkland then happened about 1.5 years into these focus groups. Their attitude changed a little bit after Parkland, and that's when we were able to do really the work to design the Advocator app. I was just in that same school last week, and there were still kids saying, no way, I'm not going to use that app. And we'd onboarded 1,300 of them. And interestingly enough, within the first 6 weeks of this year, there have been 20 reports. One kid had been reported by 4 people. He had been posting anti-Semitic comments on social media and threats. And so when I talked to the administration, they're like, the other ones we've resolved, but we're having a deep investigation based on this one. And at that point, the administration was like, because they're naysayers too, right? Why would we want a reporting system so that youth could have a voice? And it was very clear that they were very thankful, because this young man probably would not have come to their attention had there not been this mechanism to report confidentially, but not anonymously. And so we learned a lot in the 2 years, in that the high school students felt as if there was lip service to their involvement in the school safety committees, that they felt that the adults, especially Parkland youth, had really failed generations of kids, of saying they were doing things when they are not doing things. They want to use the efficient way to report, but they felt that the trust had to be there before this open line of communication could happen with the adults. And they actually also argued that the adults have very limited follow through. So even when they take the risk to go against some popular peer group that's doing something, they feel that the adults need something like the Advocator so that they're held responsible. They also felt that schools need to work harder to establish a positive school climate, that they need to focus on, as I said, both emotional as well as physical safety. They were very direct about fairness and equity issues need to be addressed. And this is at the time during this administration when racism kind of reared its ugly head in such a way that the high school students in our studies were very open and honest about the ways in which specifically African American students were viewed versus Caucasian students in a college town of Urbana-Champaign. So it just shows it could happen anywhere. And they also felt that, you know, when there was an attention toward building student bonding and school engagement, that would be important, and certainly that's grounded in the literature. They also felt that there was lots of barriers to really opening that line of communication, whether it's bullying, harassment, or aggression, weapons, drugs, and alcohol on campus. One of the reports also was a gentleman was a high school student who was chronically victimized, was bringing a gun to school, and finally someone reported him, which is sad in some ways. They thought that the lack of supports for students with mental health issues were creating safety issues and challenging to communication. Overt discrimination really shuts down people of having relationships and building that. So I think we have to recognize that our schools are just as racist as the communities outside of them, and well-meaning white teachers, but we need to diversify our teaching population if we're going to address some of this as well. And inequities in all aspects of education. So this is Advocator, and I can send you the link to this, but we're in the field now, and this comes with larger instructional activities around restorative problem solving, social emotional learning, and then it's largely built on student campaigns. So we worked with students to create a handbook on how it is that you create student campaigns, how it is that you do data collection, how do you table in communities and outreach, those types of things. So that's Advocator. And so Ha, you're 1 minute left. School climate, hopefully you've heard in the last 30 minutes, a multidimensional construct that can be assessed, and it's sensitive to change, so we can make a difference. Addressing bullying and school violence and promoting a positive school climate requires this multi-pronged approach. So it's not just the student has to be a teacher. So if you can get the parents to communicate, that's good too. We try to survey the parents on their perceptions of the school climate because that matters. If they see it as negative, then they're going to shut down that home to school communication, which we know affects student achievement and other academic outcomes. And what I keep saying and preaching all over the world, I was just in China and Russia the last couple of months talking about youth have to be authentically engaged in this process, because the youth actually have more knowledge than any adults in the building. And how do we partner with them to create a safer space? So when the one gentleman told me that he would never use it, and I said, that's okay. I don't need 1,300 to use it. I need a few brave ones of you to use it. And if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. So I will end there.
Thank you for the quick and great information. I know we probably have lots of people have questions, and it's also really interesting because I know we've been on tour and we've seen so much of this, especially in middle schools. I think that data is just something we see in every school we visit and talk to students in. And so I definitely want to open up the floor. We have 19 other people here who I'm sure have questions, a lot of which I know are doing deep school climate work. So I'll just open the floor to questions, and folks are also feel free to use the chat to ask questions because sometimes that's easier too. So I'll kick it over. Does anybody have an opening question?
I know Joshua did.
I'm sure Amy does.
Okay. So So I am first I'm a student at Chicago Public Schools. I am a student at Walter H. Byatt High School for the Arts. I am a part of I was a part of the student council last year. And I know that I've only been in CPS for 2 years, and I've been doing research on the student climate. And I know that CPS said they have a standard to support the creation of a safe, nurturing, and participatory learning environments within CPS. That was in 2014. It was like a school climate goal. And, like under the 2013 and 2014 Chicago Public School Action Plan, it states that the district will establish a universal standard for universal climate in school that makes students feel valued, challenged, and supported. So I personally feel like CPS isn't meeting that goal. Like they're somewhat meeting it, but they're not. And I feel like because like CPS has not stressed enough to keep students safe, mostly while students in 2020, 2019 is finding themselves in troubled situations, and mostly teachers in Chicago Public Schools are not they're not making sure that students get the proper amount of education because bullying of special education students and sexual harassment gosh, I forgot her name. Gosh, what's her name again?
Dorothy.
Yeah, like you said Dorothy, right?
Yeah, Dorothy, like
Yeah,
the Wizard of Oz.
like Dorothy said, they're bullying because of special education and sexual harassment. It kind of distracts students from getting a proper amount of education, like Black African American males myself. So I asked the teachers at Walter Diet, well, what do they think about school climate? Because since y'all sent me the email, I was like, wow, I'll do my own research about it. Mm-hmm. So I asked them, and they said that students were pressured on how they're treated at home, and they bring that to school. So to change, so I got to the idea to change school climate. I think we need to start getting parents to intervene with their children to do better. Because if you get parents to intervene, and it'll change the school climate. It'll change climate at home and at school. So I think children would do better. And then like some students, why they don't feel as if the need to snitch, what you would call, is because like most students feel as if school officials wouldn't really listen to them, because I know like school officials and CPS don't really give students the voice to listen to people. So I feel like that's one of the reasons, so in order to I want to know, my main question is like, what can I do as a student to like go to CPS and like go to CPS officials, like them to listen to us and give students a voice, especially not through like always student council, because trust me, it's stressful being a student council member. I was formerly one. So I want to know, like, what can I do as a student slash student council member of a CPS school to get the school officials to like make a change in like because it's Chicago, it's a dangerous place. So I want to know what I can do. That was my question.
Yeah, so it's great. Kind of makes my day to see a CPS student. So Chicago Public Schools, number 3 largest school district in the country. So it's a bureaucracy, and pillars that you were just talking about, I was involved in some of that, and that really was very much aligned with what you saw from the Department of Education. There's probably some similarities. The problem is that CPS is a big district. Like I'm working in Miami-Dade, which is number 4, and it's just massive. It's massive for you to know. What I would encourage you to do is to start with your home school and see if you can create some momentum there. But then also partner with, and I can hook you up with some people that I've worked with in Chicago Public Schools that has been trying to do some of this really, really challenging work. So you need to partner. You need to find your allies that are known to Chicago Public Schools. Problem is there's so much turnover in the superintendency, and even their missions change. Now I do want you to, so it's very interesting that when you ask the teachers, they pointed to home, right? They were like, yes, no doubt in my mind that's true. That is the biggest cop out, and I hear it all the time. Because I didn't have time to show you this, I had the slides in there. But when kids to say I come from, which I did, I came from a home in my childhood where there may be violence, where there was no structure, there might have been drugs, there could have been, I don't know, name it. Just think of a dysfunctional family in that way, or chaotic, or single parent, or no bedtime. You're lucky if you ate. Maybe the police were at your house all the time. Our research shows you can have that dysfunctional family, but if you come into a school that is welcoming, that you feel connected, I can show you the graphs. I'll send them to you. Your bullying is lower, your delinquency itself. So we know that schools are protective. Now, if those teachers are waiting to change those families that are intergenerational, what they're seeing, that's the cop-out. That means, like, it's not my fault they're bringing it from school. It's all about home. Well, our research shows that might be the fact, but many of us that grew up in those kind of environments are now here, successful, because we had a school to go to, right? And so I'll send you some articles that show there's no way teachers or even you are going to change all the institutional racism that's contributing to the challenges that families are having in Chicago and the perceptions of Chicago. If we're waiting for that, then we're giving up on kids that are coming to a school. We owe it to those kids, those teachers that you talk to. I would challenge them, because that is not science. Science is that regardless, those kids you need to create a positive, supportive environment. Now, some kids are just going to cuss them out and they're just going to be challenging, but others may not be. And kids that come from those home environments are just waiting for it, because the adults have failed them, right? So why would I go to school and how the adult's going to be any different? Be the different adult is what I always say. Be the different adult. Push back at them. They're like, I'm not like you. I want to create a safe environment. That's one thing. The other thing is, I totally agree with your comment of like, why should I snitch if the adults aren't going to do anything about it? And that's what the student said, right? And so, you're going to have to figure out who's doing this work you can't take on. And I'm not saying you can't. It's going to be a challenge to take on the 3rd largest school district that's completely corrupt. Right? I'm being taped in the state of Illinois, where, there's politics that have interfered, that, when the mayor closed schools, and I was in those schools when they closed schools, and we had to walk kids through gang-infested spaces because he wanted to shut down some of those schools. So you're fighting this political thing, but I say fight it. But you can't do it alone. You have to figure out who else is doing some of that school climate work, and there's a lot of them that are doing this work. But I would start with your home school and challenge the adults in that building if you feel safe to do that, because and maybe you have a good climate. I don't know. Maybe your climate is okay.
Personally, I'm a 10th grade student, sophomore in high school. So I know that's gonna be complicated myself doing that, like, because like I said, I was a student council member. I went to so many events. I brung up a lot of events to go to, and I took a team with me. We was there. We were trying to learn more of how to fight school culture and make it better and like advance it. But that's complicated. I know exactly where you're coming from when you say like you can't do it alone. Because I mean, it's kind of complicated. So I know what you
Yeah,
mean.
but we just need to get you partnered up with people that there's people that have given their life to try safer spaces in Chicago public schools. And there have been some successes. I went to many schools in the South Side, Chicago, 7 o'clock in the morning. They're asking me if I want crack. I was like, I don't really want crack. I got my crack, I got my coffee. And then you go into a school that's the most caring, loving, beautiful space inside these chaotic environments. But that's not to say, I've been in the North Shore of Chicago too, and some north parts of Chicago public schools where the climate is just as toxic for other reasons. And so, it's a problem, unfortunately. I do think that though, even the work you did in student council is critical. You probably saved a lot of kids' lives by the work that you did. And it's baby steps, it's small steps. It's not going to change tremendously over time. That this is, it's good because these are the same conversations we're having at universities, right? So Syracuse, students just walked out because of, racism and blatantly hateful stuff. So it's not going to stop when you get your high school diploma. And Syracuse is a private university. So there you have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Joshua. Anyone else want to hop in on some other? Yeah, Josh was doing great work in CPS and lots of cool things happening there. Some bright spots. Anyone else have a question? I know we have a bunch of question askers on here.
I do have a question, but I totally will defer to any student. Anybody?
So I think we might have a similar idea.
Yeah, go for it, Emmy.
Go, Emmy.
I love your point about pushing back on teachers with the home cop-out, and I'm wondering, a cop-out that we see a lot doing climate audits in Kentucky is, this is a small school and these kids have been together since they were little, like bullying is just natural. I think that one is so pervasive because they're just like, okay, I can ignore all this data. And then the second, I think underlying really tough barrier we have is the apathy of students themselves. And I think you got at that. I mean, when you're talking about the app, but I'm wondering if you have other thoughts around addressing student apathy in this work.
Yeah, so the first one, I've heard that a lot in my work in rural parts of Illinois, because there would be a building where the students would be K through 12, one building K through 12. And the victims, I remember presenting data to the administration, and I said, okay, you have 400 students in this school and 378 name the same kid as being chronically victimized. What are we going to do about it? And I think up until that point, I'd been talking about kind of these really stable victims I was concerned about in the school, but those numbers were kind of remarkable to think that you asked 400 students who's chronically victimized in the school and 378 nominated the same person. So again, I think that the teaching profession is so stressful that if they can dismiss a lot of these data, and in the area of school safety, they can get away with this, right? In academics, you can't. In academics, there has to be, interventions put in place. Until we have that same expectation with bullying and sexual harassment, they'll be dismissing. But I think you just keep coming back at them and challenge them, right? And I know there's a huge power differential, right? So it's very different for me to come in and go, what are you talking about? Like, you can't, this is the science behind it. And just because this is the way it is, it doesn't mean that child who's been victimized over the years, because they're in the same place, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a change. Student apathy is a little frustrating to me. I spent every day last week in some high schools with my students and teams in Illinois. And I have to say that there was a lot of hoeing and humming and almost disrespectful behavior about how I was wasting my time doing this work. And I can say, well, I've been doing it for 25 years. I'm going to continue to do it and make a difference. But then those are the few that appear, and they're loud about their apathy, right? They want to tell you how much they don't care, but they're telling you how much they don't care. So, but then there's there's like 90% of the other students where they want to be involved, engaged, but they don't know how, or they've tried in the past. So I think for us, what's been helpful is to, if there's someone that's presenting with this apathy, I want to know their story. Has it that they tried things and it never went anywhere, felt like they weren't being heard? What's their narrative or this discourse? And we heard that through the focus groups and did that work. But I think, and it varies, right? I know that seniors, when I was talking to seniors last week, they're on their way out, right? And so I had to engage them as, yes, you're on your way out, but wouldn't it be nice for you to leave a legacy of some sort, or at least just help our freshmen here get through this year? So we've had success with some multi-generation mentorship to try to pull out those students that present with this apathy and give them a position where they can still see that they have utility for the younger kids. And so we've done different models. We've also had some of these high school students then go work in our middle schools. Again, that intergenerational mentoring model is part of some of the youth-led interventions, because a 7th and 8th grader would much rather hear from a high schooler than from me, or even a teacher. And so that's one thing to consider. But the small town, this is the way it is, that's the sheriff's son, I've heard it over and over again, and it's just, you kind of have to just kind of go around it and say, understand but that's, and it's dismissive. And their attempt is, one, to protect themselves because they're stressed out as teachers and educators, but two, it's to silence you. And so try different angles.
Rachel has a question from the chat, and she asks about like some of the work they're doing in Kentucky is where students are helping design and disseminating studies, and they're calling them school climate audits. Have you had any experience with this, or do you have thoughts, comments about this kind of model of school and climate intervention?
Yeah, I think it's taken hold nationally. We've been doing, we never really called them audits, though. I like that. Depending on the project and the class that we've done, so sometimes we've done it through quantitative literacy and math classes and other social science classes or studies classes where they would develop a measure, learn about psychometric theory, so it would become more of the classwork, or we've done it through social justice classes, depending. But those classes are also being cut in the curriculum. But if there's a full out social justice, we've done these environmental, we also call them environmental scans, you call them school climate audits. I think it's great. When we can tie, and I don't know Kentucky well enough, but when you can tie that type of activity to the standards, education standards, I think that would be critical because there's a lot of things. I mean, everything's tapped when you think about writing and narrating, kind of a survey, the psychometrics, the math, the quantitative skills necessary. Oh, the graphics, like how do you depict the best way to depict, frequencies? Well, you can create a scale, but nobody knows about a correlation or regression, those types of things. So I think it would be great. In so many ways. How do you institutionalize that? I think that is more challenging. It has to be coursework almost to make it worth a high schooler's time, right? There's still pressure. You got to get a lot of classes in. You've got to be college ready if that's what you're deciding to do. And so there's competition within the curriculum. And then you have to have faculty advisors that are willing to do the extra work. This isn't a just, standardized test. It just takes a lot lot of work, but
I do want to
powerful.
I do want to pipe in here. This is Rachel.
Yeah. Hey, Rachel.
So, hi. First of all, I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose, everything you've said. And also, Joshua, your questioning has been amazing. Thank you all. And I'm with Emmy. She's one of our 2 student co-directors, and I'm just the adult director in Kentucky. So we're testing out these models of student-led school climate audits. We've been doing it for a couple of years and refining it as we go. We're finding there's a lot of traction because we're not embedding it in a curriculum. We're coming in as an outside, independent, community-based group of students across the state, and we're working with the willing in schools. We're coming in, we're delivering some climate workshops targeted to interested students and staff, and then we're leaving them and pitching it, and then they come back to us and say, we want to take this on as a class or an equity group or a leadership group, and that's what we're testing here. And we've also simplified the reporting so that it is not, we started out doing graduate level reports, now it's infographics, it's Visme, and students figure out how to share back the data, and the process is the product. It's that idea of creating reflective space on climate and culture that students are driving, that we think we're after. So that's what we're experimenting with. It's different than what we've seen, but it's participatory action, and we think it's going to lead to some really great grassroots solutions, but we don't know if it's going to work yet. So
No, that's great. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Thanks for the share. Anyone have any kind of, like, we're coming toward the end of time, we have about 10 minutes left. Do we have any burning questions? Otherwise, I have a burning question, but I want to give everyone else an opportunity.
I have one.
My name's Zahra, and I'm a student journalism fellow, and I'm from a small school in Kentucky. But my question had to do with, like, whether you think certain like some schools having certain classes has an influence on students' love for learning or for their, like, desire for learning, because there are some classes that I know schools that are larger than mine or in bigger cities than mine have that, like, Murray doesn't, where I'm from, doesn't. And I feel like they would just be really, like, enriching classes for people to take, like a research course or a seminar course or stuff like that. Do you know if, like, in your opinion and based on your research, do you think the kind of classes that a school teaches has an influence on school climate and things like that?
Yeah, so I don't study that. So I would just be kind of going along, either giving you my opinion that, you know, everybody should have the same diversity in courses. You know, I was surprised when I got to college. Somehow I got into VCU, and I come from really rural, small town. I was surprised that people already had credits. I was like, what do you mean? You already have psychology credits? You have this kind of credit? And things have changed. I've been out for 30 years, but what I can tell you is there were only 4 or 5 of us in AP classes in my high school. And we had very limited curriculum, but I felt like the teachers, and I see it in the small rural schools now, that they try to make up for it in other ways, right? So if you don't have a social justice class, there might be a community project that you do. So it just depends, I think, on the innovation. I don't think anyone would disagree that it would be nice that if everybody had the same exposure and access, but as we talked about, education and funding of education is inequitable. I think that's why the free online, internationally global, like MOOCs, I think that's what they're called, that are free, have been developed so that we can level the playing ground for folks like yourself that are in a school that would like to take, I don't know, psychology or something that's not offered, or other types of classes. So you should look into the MOOCs. There's challenges with those too, but all you got to do is just keep going, and hopefully in a school where they'll create experiences for you. But yeah, education is not equitable.
Right. Thanks for that answer. I think one kind of final question I'm having I would love to ask as we wrap up is just kind of in the post-Parkland era of school climate, when it's become something really glamorous. I know most people on this call have been doing work pre that date, and certainly you. How do we talk about school climate? How do we make sure that those other buckets aren't being left out of the conversation around school climate, because it seems to be so safety focused? So I'm curious about your advice and learnings as dealing with the climate these days, and trying to make sure the work stays focused on things like restorative justice and environment, and those other buckets you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I was putting this together and I was like, oh, I have 30 minutes, I wanted to make sure that you understood that there's these 13 domains. And the reality is most are focusing on the safety, like 2 of the 13 domains. And I think that's a challenge. But I think in the work that you're doing in the school audits, check those audits against these domains that have been identified after decades and decades of research around climate. And I also completely sympathize with oh, now everybody wants to come to the table and talk about school climate when we've been working on this and really doing the hard work. I've studied sexual harassment for 25 years, but the Me Too movement just put it on the map, and I have to just be okay with the fact that, okay, hello, I've been talking about that for a while. And so it's a challenge, it's frustrating, and there's a lot of hardening of the schools, as you know, and what people don't tell you is at Parkland and in Broward County, where I just trained all their security specialists, most of those schools are on lockdown, so there's no indication of any good school climate. And Broward County, for the most part, because they're in panic mode and they're paying attention only to kind of safety and drills. And when you have to do a drill once a month in the state of Florida, it's pretty challenging to create safety for kids. And we haven't figured out how it is that you do a drill once a month, and how you then maintain the other aspects of those other 12 domains. I think the data are strong enough, and we're writing about it in the area of inequities and racism and challenges there, that we're going to start. I don't think we can continue to ignore where it's showing up in higher ed. These, students are also engaging in these types of behaviors in K through 12 settings. So I think you kind of, lick your wounds a little bit, and you're like, all right, thank you for coming to the table. But I think the loudest thing that I hear when I sit on panels with some of the students that survived there in Parkland, they're very much concerned about the broader school climate. They understand these 13 domains. They are also feel that it has to be driven by them and the youth and the student campaign. So I think you create and try not to, this is the big thing. Many researchers and scientists will compromise what they know to be true in climate because someone's uncomfortable about asking about climate of, say, gender and sexual minority youth, or the big elephant in the room of African American students being treated differently than the white students. And I think you just need to stay with it and be that squeaky wheel, because otherwise, my colleagues that have had to compromise, I can see that it hurts them. In science, you shouldn't have to compromise science, but it's hard to do this work and very politicized. You're in Kentucky. It's a different environment. I had the luxury of doing some of this great work in Chicago public schools, but when I moved to Florida, I was encouraged in Alachua County, where Gainesville University of Florida is, not to talk about gender and sexual minority youth, not to talk about youth suicide. That's how I ended up in Broward and Miami-Dade. And that the communities are suffering because they have their head in the sand. So I think you keep doing your work, and if someone pushes back, it means that you're onto something and you go forward, is what I say.
Dorothy, thank you so much for
Yeah.
be with us. Guys, this is so awesome that you guys just got to spend an hour talking to Dorothy. She's a huge deal in this field. So thank you. You can share any of the resources with me, and then I can get it to the people who is asking for it. So thank you again. So excited.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you again.
Bye.
You too.
Travel.
Bye.